Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel US Immigration News. We hope you are doing great. Well, in today's video, we will be talking about Trump's first 100 days, drill more and deport million.
All right, so are you ready to take a look at what Trump might do if he gets a second term?
Absolutely.
Based on this source, we've got, looks like he's not going to be wasting any time.
No.
Energy and immigration are right at the top of the list, and his plans could really shake things up.
Yeah.
Remember that drill baby drill slogan?
Oh, yeah.
Well, get this, it's back.
Wow.
And you might be surprised at how far Trump's willing to go to boost oil and gas production. Plus, we're talking a massive deportation plan
Okay.
and some serious tariff threats, all aimed at Mexico. Intrigued.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's unpack all of this.
It's going to be really interesting to look at how different things could be compared to the last administration.
Right.
If these plans actually go into effect, we could be in for some major legislative battles and societal clashes.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about this drill baby drill revival.
Okay.
It sounds like Trump is really going all in on oil and gas.
Yeah.
Opening federal lands, fast-tracking pipelines, expanding offshore drilling. I mean, it's a pretty aggressive approach.
Yeah, what's interesting here is that this signals a real shift in priorities.
Right.
It suggests a move away from the emphasis on renewable energy that we've seen recently.
Yeah.
And a return to energy independence
Yeah.
as a key national security objective.
And get this, the source says that Trump wants to expedite drilling permits.
Wow.
Right, from day one.
Really?
Talk about a clear message.
Yeah.
But what does all this mean for, everyday folks like us?
Well, one possibility is that we could see lower gas prices at the pump.
Oh, okay.
Of course, we have to consider the environmental impact too.
Right.
This move away from renewables could significantly affect how we tackle climate change.
Yeah, there's always more to consider than just the, immediate impact.
Definitely.
Okay. And speaking of complex issues, let's move on to immigration.
Okay.
The source we have paints a pretty dramatic picture of Trump's plans,
Yeah.
with a huge deportation program being a top priority. The largest in U.S. history, in fact.
Well, that brings up a major question about how realistic all of this is. Trying to find and deport millions of people is a huge logistical and financial challenge.
Yeah.
And then there are the ethical aspects.
Right.
And how this would affect different communities.
It's even mentioned that Trump is considering using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to justify mass deportations. This Alien Enemies Act, I mean, wow, it feels like we're stepping back in time.
Yeah.
Can you help us understand why dusting off this old law would be so controversial now?
Well, this law is pretty old.
Yeah.
It was originally designed to handle threats during wartime. It basically gives the president a lot of power to detain or deport non-citizens who are considered dangerous to national security. But the definition of threat is really broad and open to interpretation.
So you're saying this law could be used to target almost anyone, even if they haven't broken any laws?
That's the worry. Using it for mass deportations of undocumented immigrants would be a completely different way of applying it.
Right.
It would almost certainly face legal challenges, and the courts would have to decide if using it this way is even allowed under the Constitution.
So it sounds like we could be in for a lot of legal battles over immigration.
Definitely.
But what about the impact on the economy?
Okay.
The source mentions tax cuts being a major focus for Trump and his Republican allies. It seems like they're pushing this idea of tax cuts as a way to stimulate economic growth.
And that's where the idea of supply-side economics comes in.
Okay.
In simple terms, this theory suggests that if you reduce taxes, especially for businesses, it can encourage more investment and create more jobs. Of course, there are people who disagree with this approach, arguing that tax cuts mainly benefit the wealthy and can lead to bigger government deficits.
It seems like we're in for a repeat of the tax cut debates we saw during Trump's first term.
Probably.
But what I'm really curious about is how all of this will affect the average person's finances.
Yeah.
The source doesn't really explain the long-term impact these tax cuts could have on things like government revenue and social programs.
Right.
Stimulating economic growth sounds good in theory.
Yeah.
But what are the potential downsides?
Those are definitely important points to think about.
Yeah.
We have to remember that economic policies can have complicated and wide-ranging effects that might not be obvious right away.
All right, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about Mexico.
Right.
The source says that Trump is threatening to slap a 25% tariff
Wow.
on all Mexican goods.
Really?
If they don't help out more with controlling immigration. That's a pretty big threat, isn't it?
It is, and it raises serious concerns about potential economic and diplomatic consequences. A tariff like that would likely harm businesses and consumers on both sides of the border.
Okay.
It could also strain the U.S.-Mexico relationship. Yeah.
Which is already facing challenges on issues like trade and security.
And let's not forget about the Remain in Mexico policy.
Right.
The source mentions that Trump plans to bring that back. And as we've discussed, that policy is really controversial from a humanitarian point of view.
Yes. Making asylum seekers wait in Mexico while their cases are processed in the U.S. has been widely criticized. There are serious concerns about their safety and well-being in Mexico, where they may be exposed to violence, exploitation, and limited access to legal help.
So it looks like this policy comes with ethical and logistical challenges.
Yeah.
On top of the potential diplomatic tensions it could create with Mexico.
Definitely.
It's pretty clear that if Trump gets a second term, it could be a pretty wild ride.
Yeah.
With big implications both here in the U.S. and internationally.
Absolutely. And this is exactly why it's so important to stay informed, have thoughtful discussions, and hold our leaders accountable for what they do. I couldn't agree more. We can't just sit back and watch.
No.
We need to be active and engaged citizens.
Absolutely.
Especially when things are uncertain and changing.
Right.
We're going to take a quick pause here.
Okay.
But when we come back, we'll delve deeper into some of the specific policies in this source.
Okay.
And explore the challenges and opportunities they might bring.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned.
All right. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the possibility of some serious legal battles if Trump gets a second term.
Yeah.
We know from the source that he's looking at using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to back up mass deportations.
Right.
This raises a whole bunch of red flags.
You know, when we talk about this Alien Enemies Act, it sounds like something straight out of a history book.
Yeah.
Why would using this law for something like this be so controversial today?
It's important to understand that this act goes way back to the very beginning of the United States. It was initially meant to deal with threats during times of war. It gives the president a lot of power. He can detain or deport non-citizens who are seen as a threat to national security.
Right.
But here's the thing. The definition of what counts as a threat is really broad and could be interpreted in many ways.
So what you're saying is that this law could potentially be used to target just about anyone, even if they haven't actually done anything wrong.
That's exactly the concern.
Wow.
Using it to justify mass deportations of people who are in the country without documentation would be a huge shift from how it's been used in the past. It would most likely face legal challenges right away. And the courts would have to step in and decide if such a broad use of the act is even constitutional.
Okay, so it sounds like immigration is going to be a real legal battleground.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears and talk about the economy for a minute.
Okay.
The source talks about Trump's focus on things like tax cuts and deregulation, but it doesn't get into specifics. What kinds of policies could we actually see happening?
Well, based on what we know from his first term and what he said during his campaign, it's pretty likely that he'll push for more reductions in corporate tax rates. There might also be attempts to make the tax code simpler, which sounds good on paper, but the details are what really matter. And, of course, we can expect to see him continue with his deregulation efforts, especially in industries like energy and finance.
So basically, we're looking at more of the cut taxes and red tape approach from his first term. But what will all of this actually mean? I mean, the source talks a lot about economic growth, but is it really that simple?
Well, there's no question that tax cuts can give the economy a short-term boost. Businesses may end up with more money to invest and hire more people, and consumers might have more disposable income. But the bigger question is what happens in the long run?
Exactly. Because if the government is taking in less tax revenue, that means there's less money for things like social programs, right? And isn't there a risk that these tax cuts will just make the gap between the rich and the poor even bigger?
Those are really important things to consider.
Yeah.
We can't just focus on the promises of economic growth.
Right.
We have to think about potential downsides too.
Okay.
Like bigger deficits, cuts to programs that people rely on, and growing inequality.
It seems like every policy decision has these ripple effects that
Yeah.
we need to think about carefully.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to the energy issue for a second.
Okay.
The source makes it pretty clear that Trump is all in on drill, baby, drill.
Uh-huh.
But how will this affect the global energy landscape and our efforts to fight climate change?
Well, if the U.S. goes back to relying more on fossil fuels,
Right.
it could send a signal to other countries that it's okay to back off on their own climate commitments.
Mm-hmm.
That could really undermine international efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
So it sounds like it could be a setback for the fight against climate change.
Yeah.
But what about the argument that increasing our own oil and gas production will make the U.S. more energy independent?
That's an argument we hear a lot.
Right.
And there's some truth to it.
Okay.
Increasing domestic production can reduce our dependence on foreign sources of energy.
Right.
But it's not a simple solution.
Okay.
The global energy market is incredibly complex. And even if the U.S. becomes a major producer,
Right.
we'll still be affected by global prices and geopolitical events.
Okay, so it's not as simple as just drilling our way to energy independence.
Right.
There's a lot more to the story.
Yeah.
Speaking of complicated stories,
Okay.
let's circle back to Mexico.
All right.
Trump has threatened to put a 25% tariff on all Mexican goods if they don't cooperate on immigration.
Right.
That's a pretty extreme move, isn't it?
It is. And it could lead to serious economic and diplomatic consequences.
Uh-huh.
A tariff like that would likely hurt businesses and consumers on both sides of the border.
Right.
It could also damage the U.S.-Mexico relationship,
Yeah.
which is already strained due to disagreements on trade and security.
And then there's the Remain in Mexico policy, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That policy is really controversial because of the humanitarian concerns it raises.
Exactly. Forcing asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their cases are being processed in the U.S. has been widely criticized. There are serious worries about their safety and well-being while they're in Mexico,
Right.
because they may face violence, exploitation, and limited access to legal assistance.
So it seems like this policy is problematic on multiple levels,
Yeah.
ethical, logistical, and in terms of our relationship with Mexico,
Definitely.
it's becoming pretty clear that if Trump wins a second term, it could be a very tumultuous time
Yeah,
with major consequences both here at home and on the international stage.
absolutely. It just goes to show how important it is to stay informed,
Right.
engage in thoughtful conversations about these issues,
Uh-huh.
and hold our leaders accountable for their actions.
All right.
Well said. Now we're going to shift our focus a bit
Okay.
and take a look at the bigger picture.
Right.
What are some of the potential scenarios that could play out over the next 4 years if Trump is reelected? What might a second Trump term actually look like? Welcome back. We've spent this episode talking about some pretty major changes that could happen if Trump gets a second term.
Yeah.
Everything from energy and immigration to the economy.
Yeah.
And our relationship with Mexico seems to be up for grabs.
It's a lot to process.
Now let's step back and think about the bigger picture here.
Okay.
What are some possible scenarios that we could see play out over the next 4 years if he is reelected?
Well, one possibility is that Trump runs into a lot of resistance, both from Democrats in Congress
Right.
and from different groups all across the country.
Okay.
We could see legal challenges to his policies.
Protests and a general feeling of gridlock
Yeah.
in Washington.
So basically, more of the political division and fighting that we've already been seeing.
It's definitely a possibility.
But what if Trump actually manages to get most of his agenda through? What would that mean for the U.S.?
If he can really put his plans into action on things like energy, immigration, and taxes,
Right?
it would be a pretty significant shift in direction for the country.
Okay.
We could see the U.S. taking a more inward-looking approach when it comes to foreign policy, a renewed focus on fossil fuels,
Okay.
and a much stricter system for immigration.
And what about the impact on society and culture?
Yeah,
I mean, we've talked about the possibility of more division and unrest,
right.
but could these policies lead to even bigger changes down the road in American society?
It's definitely something to think about. If these policies are put into practice and stay in place for a while,
Yeah.
they could have a real impact on the makeup of the country. How involved the government is in people's lives,
Right.
and maybe even how Americans see themselves.
It's a lot to take in, and it really feels like the stakes are high.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Right.
what's the most important thing you want our listener to take away from all of this? What do you hope they'll remember?
I think the key message here is that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of this country.
Okay.
It all starts with staying informed.
Right.
Having respectful conversations with each other.
Yeah.
Even when we disagree, and getting involved in the political process, whether that's voting or speaking out about the issues that matter to us.
Yeah.
What we do matters.
I couldn't agree more. We can't just be bystanders.
No.
We need to be active and engaged citizens.
Absolutely.
Especially during times like these when there's so much uncertainty and change happening.
You're exactly right. Yeah. And it's crucial to remember that there are many different perspectives out there. It's so important to listen to a variety of viewpoints.
Yeah.
Really think critically about the information we're getting.
Right.
And then form our own opinions.
So well said. As we head into this next chapter in American politics, what role do you see yourself playing? Are you going to watch from the sidelines, or are you going to actively try to shape the kind of future you want to see?
Good question.
The choice is yours. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Donald Trump's second term promises to be defined by ambitious and aggressive policies and at addressing key issues like the economy and illegal immigration. His plans for the first 100 days in office focus heavily on energy independence and a tough stance on immigration. One of Trump's most significant policy changes will be in energy. His Drill, Baby Drill campaign slogan from 2016 is set to make a comeback. On his first day in office, Trump aims to expedite drilling permits, push forward pending pipeline projects, and increase the sale of offshore drilling rights. This will mark a stark departure from the green policies of the Biden administration, focusing instead on reviving the fossil fuel industry. Trump's energy agenda seeks to lower energy prices, create jobs in the oil and gas sector, and make the U.S. more energy independent by expanding domestic drilling. He aims to stimulate economic growth, particularly in regions that have seen job losses in the traditional energy industries. Another major focus will be illegal immigration. Trump has promised to launch the largest deportation operation in U.S. history on day one, targeting undocumented immigrants already in the country. This plan involves using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a law that has been rarely used in modern times to deport immigrants that deems a threat in national security. While the use of this law is controversial, Trump believes it provides the legal basis to carry out mass deportations. His second immigration strategy focuses on Mexico, aiming to pressure the country into doing more to stop illegal immigration and drug trafficking. Trump's intent to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy, which requires asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their claims are processed in the U.S. Additionally, he plans to impose a 25% tariff on all Mexican imports unless the Mexican government takes stronger action to curb the flow of migrants. Trump's first 100 days will also include effort to pass significant legislative reforms, particularly in taxation, with the Republican controlling the Senate and possibly the House of Representatives. Trump is likely to push through tax cuts for businesses and individuals. These tax cuts are intended to stimulate economic growth, create jobs, and address concern over the U.S. tax code. Trump's focus on deregulation and tax relief align with his broader goal of revitalizing the economy and strengthening American industries. Overall, Trump's return to the White House will see aggressive moves in energy policy, immigration, and economic reform. With a Republican-controlled Congress, Trump has the opportunity to push through his legislative agenda quickly, setting the tone for his second term. These first 100 days will likely be marked by efforts to shift the U.S. back towards his vision of a strong energy-independent economy while tackling immigration head-on.